Hi, this is Rahman Sheikh. Welcome to Fortnightly Railway Transportation Systems podcast. I am the host and railway systems specialist working in this industry for 24 years and counting. This podcast is primarily focused on railway experts who have vast amount of experience and contributed greatly to this amazing industry. This is not a technical seminar but focuses on feel good stories, individual journeys, their success and failures, motivating younger generation to kickstart their career in railways and creating a sense of pride for the railway people who devoted their lives on the most environment friendly public transportation. Our guest for this fortnight is Mark Scott, a career investor, director, and executive manager of consulting businesses that have straddled many industries, including rail and transportation. Mark is currently chairman and founding partner of both Think Systems and Investructure and serves on the board as a director of Providence Consulting. All the consulting businesses with a different but broad array of offerings from project, program, and commercial delivery to engineering, integration, and assurance. Mark is also a non-executive director of Toustone, a data analytics business that has developed an array of AI-based decision intelligence solutions for the rail and transport sector, amongst others. As well as his recent roles with these companies, Mark has founded and managed multiple startups, including Scott Lister and Bluefield Consulting, which were later acquired by SYSTRA and Lloyd's Register, respectively. Post-acquisition, Mark was CEO of SYSTRA in ANZ for 6 years and general manager of Lloyd's Register's transport business for 3 years. Consequently, despite still being the tender age of 47, he has been running consulting businesses for almost 20 years. Mark is passionate about creating businesses that present opportunities to employees and offer real value to clients. In his words, the two are inextricably linked. Hi, Mark. Welcome to Railway Transportation Systems Podcast. It's a privilege to have you as a guest on this platform.
Likewise, Rahman, and thank you for your kind introduction. I've actually been following your podcast for some time now. You've interviewed a number of my friends and colleagues, people who I respect hugely. So I've got to say, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words. Yeah. Mark, as you know, my first generic question would be absolutely about my guest. So could you please share us your professional journey, including your transition from engineer to entrepreneur in rail and other transportation industries or even other industries?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think if I look back on my journey, I've always been quite entrepreneurial. And prior to even thinking about career goals, I remember doing entrepreneurial things at school, for example. So by example, I ran a newspaper. I did ticket sales for events. I ran a stationary hire service even in class. And on that last particular one, I remember latching on to the fact that a reasonable number of kids in my class would forget pencil cases and similar things quite regularly. So I simply went out to a local store, bought a bunch of Bic pens and other forms of stationery, and I'd hire the stuff out for about 50% of the capital cost per day. And I was 11 when I was doing that. And today I've never seen a more lucrative business model. So it's the sort of thing I've been doing since a young age. But my professional journey started in 97 as a graduate nuclear engineer with Rolls-Royce in Derby back in the UK. And my first 4 years were spent in system safety and safety cases predominantly. Lots of analysis and probably a million miles away from being an entrepreneur. But I was very fortunate to have worked with global leaders in nuclear engineering, system safety and development of critical systems. So a lot of the work was cutting edge. And after 4 years with the company, I left having received very much an expert introduction to risk analysis, reliability, integrated logistics support, human factors and similar disciplines. But in 2001, I moved to London. Initially had a brief spell with Atkins, who are now SNC-Lavalin, in their civil nuclear team. But in less than 12 months, I was headhunted into Network Rail's West Coast route modification program. Commenced my first job in the rail sector as a safety case advisor. At the time, it was Europe's largest transport infrastructure project, and it was highly complex. It was around $20 billion Australian, and it was a brownfield rail project. So it was a real trial by fire, but also it was a real treat in terms of learning about the rail sector and particularly the multitude of stakeholders and personalities. So I was approaching about 2 years on the West Coast project when, with my Australian girlfriend at the time, I took the plunge to leave London and move to Sydney. Work-wise, I didn't have a job lined up, and I had no idea at the time as to what opportunities existed. I remember going on to Seek, which is the job website, and typing in a few words like safety case and risk management, and it returned very few results. But I came out here, I spent just a couple of weeks having job interviews. I spoke to a few recruiters, and I was offered a couple of positions with consultancies. One was with a small Australian risk management consultancy, and another was with a large multinational. I decided to take the job with the small consultancy. That company was called Quest, spelt QEST. It was born out of the oil and gas industry. It was largely safety risk focused, but had a decent pedigree in enterprise-wide events and project risk space. About 60 staff, 10 to 12 of us in Sydney. And it was quite a nice company to work for, one where you got the opportunity to do a real broad range of stuff. But the problem was that after less than 12 months there, the owners had taken the decision to sell to a company called GHD, who you may know. Now, nothing against GHD. I think GHD is a great business. I've got a lot of friends and colleagues there. But having only recently turned down an offer with one large consultancy, I was not particularly happy about going to work for another one. And I think another factor that played into what ultimately became my decision to leave Quest was that Quest was very much an oil and gas business. Two of us, a guy called Howard Lister, who was my boss at the time, and myself, we were pretty much the whole of the rail business. And so we'd been doing well with little support from the broader company, and it seemed that we'd do equally well on our own. So ultimately, in June 2004, that was what we decided to do, and we formed a company called Bluefield Consulting. We agreed that name in Sydney's Three Wise Monkeys pub, and we targeted the areas of safety case development, HSEQ management systems, and human factors. So at the time, safety cases and risk management principles were not well established in Australia. Legislation had been brought in for major hazard facilities, particularly in Victoria, and they were coming in nationally, and that had occurred a few years prior to my arrival. But in the rail sector, things were really not well evolved, and we were well behind Europe and even Asia. And so a lot of work needed to be done to raise the bar within the rail sector. The safety case regime was being brought in. Organisations and projects had a lot to do to align themselves to these new requirements. So Bluefield was at the heart of all that, and we led a lot of key initiatives on behalf of the industry at the time. So just by example, in our first 12 months, we developed the safety case framework for what was the old Rail Corp. We developed the organisation's what I'd say is their first proper risk profile. We developed New South Wales's first railway safety cases, and I personally authored Victoria's first railway safety case. So as I say, we're at the heart of quite a lot in the industry. And all our employees were brilliant. A lot are still active in the industry today, continuing to kick goals, leading teams at rail operators, government agencies, telco companies and consultancies and the like. So Bluefield was my first opportunity to bring my entrepreneurialism and tendencies to bear on my vocation, and really, really enjoyed it. But it only lasted 16 months. We're only about 12 months in when companies started to approach us with a view to acquisition. So one of those companies, which was Lloyd's Register, made us an offer which was too good to refuse. And so by the age of 29, I'd sold my first business. I was general manager at Lloyd's for just over 3 years. We had some good projects. We had some great people on board. The business grew well. But a bit like Quest, the piece of business I ran was not really core to the broader offering. So Lloyd's, by background, was a ship classification business. Despite buying multiple consulting businesses, it did have a global strategy to move into consultancy, but consultancy didn't really fit within it. And indeed, after I left, Lloyd's sold the whole of its global transport business to Ricardo. But I'd made the decision to leave well prior to that. And having already taken the plunge once, it felt a lot easier to do it a second time. So this time I went off to do something slightly different. I'd always been quite interested in recruitment. I had a number of friends within the industry. So in early 2009, I started a recruitment company called Ability People. Now, I had an idea for a model that I thought would work well, but the reality was I knew little about recruitment. And it was a model that turned turned out to work just about okay. Right? So it still operated for 6 or 7 years, and it just about turned a profit. But the advantage of ability and working in that sphere, it did also sit quite nicely alongside my second consultancy, which I formed at the end of 2009, which was with Howard Lister and what we called Scott Lister. Howard, by now, after many years of business partnership, practically my second wife. But as I say, we started that business, I think, November 2009. It was a big success. So within 5 years, we had 6 offices, 3 over here in Australia, 2 in the UK, 1 in Singapore, as well as I say, there was the 3 here in Australia. We had 60 to 70 staff, plus contractors on top of that. And I remember totaling up that we were leading activities on global infrastructure projects with a combined value, which was approaching $100 billion. So we were working on some really big projects. And I think it was amazing for a company of our size to be so actively involved on such a broad range of mega projects. Part of Scott Lister's offering, based on the old Bluefield model of complementary safety case management systems and human factors, but we extended the suite of services to include project management, engineering management, and systems engineering. With a global increased investment in infrastructure, our focus became more project-centric. And particularly, I wanted us to be a business that was focused on the delivery of successful projects, with safety and project assurance being an enabler for successful delivery and not being a reason to say a rail or metro line should stay closed, for example, or isn't ready to open. So this meant being a business that could embed safety principles, systems engineering, human factors into project and engineering delivery. And so it was important that we could do project management and provide engineering oversight and not just know the specialty stuff. So I've still got a Scott Lister mug at home. It still has on it the tagline, fully delivered, fully assured. And I think that captures really quite well what we were about. Again, like Bluefield, we had some amazing people in the business. You can't do anything without amazing people in your business. And it was a lot of fun. People were not just work colleagues, but in a lot of cases, they were best friends. And I still catch up often with former employees. And almost everyone still talks about our social events, which are often impromptu and would include almost everyone, arranging them last minute. So alas, after 6 years, acquisition talk started to get a bit louder. And at the end of 2015, we started a serious conversation with SYSTRA. That concluded in March 2016. And at 40, I'd sold my second business. So after that, I spent 5.5 years with SYSTRA. And again, we did well. There were highs and lows, but we grew almost threefold and had some big project wins that I think will benefit the company for years to come. I was proud of what we achieved and what we were continuing to achieve. But on a personal level, I'd got to a point where I felt like I was turning a handle a bit and just going through the motions. So after many years in similar roles, and almost 6 in that one, and 12 if you count Scott Lister, it was time to move on and reinvigorate my entrepreneurial tendencies and my skills. And so that brings me on to my current ventures. Having left SYSTRA, I decided I wanted to do something a bit different this time around. So I decided to invest in multiple businesses, and rather than lead them, I wanted to work with their owners and CEOs to get the best out of them. So, impart my knowledge where appropriate and create synergies between them. I think small consultancies tend to employ the best people. I say that with a wink, but quite often they lose out to larger businesses through the lack of breadth and depth. But by working together, small businesses can reach a lot further and deeper to offer value to their clients. And still, or while preserving the value of being small, innovative and nimble, which I think is important in today's changing business landscape. So I'll wrap up in a second. Current portfolio concerns 4 companies. They're all Australian owned, but with vast amounts of international best practice know-how. And together, I think we've got as broad an Australian footprint as any consultancy I could name. So the businesses I'm working with today are Providence, which is a management and advisory consultancy, predominantly working in defence and government sectors. Investructure, which is a project management and commercial advisory consultancy, specialising in all types of infrastructure, including transportation infrastructure. Think Systems, which is a systems engineering, assurance and human factors business that kind of straddles all sectors. And Toustone is another key one, which is a data intelligence business and specialises in data analytics and has multiple products that could practically tell you anything about your business. And very recently, we've set up a subsidiary of Providence, which we're calling Providence T&I, which delivers engineering and integration management services in rail and defence. Indeed, Steve Lemon, who was one of your guests previously, he's now part of that business. for example. So I'm a director and advisor to all 4/5 of those businesses, and frankly, I'm loving it. There you have it, 26-year career summarized in 10 minutes, or
Wow.
maybe 15.
Wow, that was a great experience, and that actually left me with lots of insights and knowledge, and no doubt why you are so successful. And that's the reason I didn't pause to you at all, because the list of questions I drafted, you actually answered most of them. And that's the reason, one of those reasons why you are so successful in your career. Lots of companies, GHD, Bluefield, Quest, and I don't know why, but directly or indirectly, most of the people from UK who are in and around rail industry come from Derby.
Yes,
And you said
very true.
and you spoke about Rolls Royce, and I think that suburb is Sinfin, right?
That's one of the sites, yeah. I was on a different site, the Rainsway site, but Sinfin's where the aero engines are manufactured, traditionally, yeah.
Yeah, I used to live there.
Ah,
So I
right,
used to work
okay.
that
Okay, small
It's a
world.
great thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a bit of lots of research about entrepreneurs. Generally, when we ask people or talk about entrepreneurs, general people like me who are just employees, who think that entrepreneurs are generally who are the ones who build business or create something new or make money, of course. So in your lengthy introduction, I'm more actually keen. What actually inspired you, and what are those instances inspired you to become an entrepreneur, apart from selling pencils?
Oh, look, I think that's a good question. And to be honest, I think it's a hard one to put a finger on. Look, I think entrepreneurialism for me is a bit more of a mindset that you have at a very young age, maybe even born with, rather than a series of events that influence a person's desire to be one. For me, I think it's the way I'm wired, first and foremost. So maybe I dance around the question a bit to start with and just give you an insight into how my mind works, perhaps. But I think I've always been very future focused, and this is probably a large part of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. I love solving problems. I love developing strategies, and to a degree, planning things. I'm a starter, most definitely, not so much a finisher. I think once I've found a solution, I'm ready to move on to the next problem, not necessarily spend the next 12 months delivering the solution itself. I can do it, but I prefer to move on to the next problem. And in consulting as well, clients have a lot of problems to solve, and entrepreneurialism, particularly within consultancy, is probably ideal for me. I also think that to be an entrepreneur, you probably do need to be a bit of a risk taker. I'm not a huge risk taker, but I think I can evaluate risk very well, and I'm prepared to take it on when I understand it. I think most people underestimate risk when it concerns someone else, but overestimate risk when it concerns themselves. And I'm a little bit different in that regard. I think I can balance it out pretty well. But coming back to your question, I think whilst I was probably born with the mindset, as I think about it, it was probably also overlaid with some experiences that pointed me in the direction, particularly of working for myself. I grew up in a working class family in a working class part of the north of England, and I had very little direct access to mentors in management and executive type roles. So my mentors tended to be small business owners, sportsmen, coaches, even DJs, for example. I can think of examples there. I also had an uncle who was a successful engineer, and he worked as a specialist contractor all over the world, digging oil wells and providing advice and such things. So these were the type of influences I had in my teens, people who were working for themselves. And growing up where I did, I wasn't part of the old British establishment, so to speak, and was never going to be part of it. Rightly or wrongly, and perhaps in the 21st century, I can say probably wrongly, I felt that if I ever wanted to succeed in a work environment, I was going to have to do something different. So ultimately, that was what I did, and went out and started my own things.
Great insights, especially that risk analysis you spoke is really a great, I don't know how to put that in words, but that actually blew my mind, because it's 100% correct. Because when we assess ourselves and when we assess for others, it's completely different. Moreover, I would like to learn more from you. As for me and for our listeners, can you please also share your thoughts on the importance of innovation and adoption in today's ever-changing business landscape?
Sure. Look, I think that there's probably a short answer to that, and maybe I'll just start with that. Look, I think adaptation is essential if you want to be successful in business, and particularly a business that operates for the long term. I think innovation is hugely important too, but comes with a warning sign for me. And by that, I mean that innovation needs to meet a need, and it needs to be timed right. Innovation can occur too early and sometimes can not solve any particular problem. So innovation for innovation's sake can be very much the wrong thing to do. But look, going a bit further, I think we're on the cusp of big change. I don't remember seeing a faster rate of innovation, particularly that which has the potential to affect the way we do business, not certainly within my career. Data intelligence, AI, quantum computing, autonomous vehicles, electromobility, renewable energy, the list goes on. And for me, I think particularly the application of AI and the ability to take broad ranges of data points and make sense of them is a big opportunity. And in fact, it's one of the reasons I joined the board of Toustone. Again, following on the AI piece, I think we've all been blown away by the latest version of ChatGPT. But for me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think the ability to use AI to take past data and ultimately predict the future presents amazing opportunities for business. And the applications are endless. Already, I've seen tools, Toustones, but others, predict the future with incredible accuracy in areas like asset reliability, project forecasting, transport operations, HR, finance, to name just a few. A lot of companies are touching every aspect of business now with AI. But make no mistake, innovation is going to present real challenges for businesses as well as the opportunities. I think a lot of companies are going to be left behind as they just won't respond fast enough. Others just won't be able to respond because their market will simply disappear. But I also think this is what's gone on for millennia. So the reality is I think most companies will respond at some point and they will survive, albeit with a smaller market share if they respond late. So, these things have happened before. I think the current level of business innovation change is probably a 30 to 40 year event, probably resembling what happened in the 80s and 90s with PCs, internet, mobile phones. But frankly, maybe in the last 30 years, very little has happened, certainly in terms of business innovation. I think most companies' operations are still governed by the 80s classic, the Excel spreadsheet, for example. A lack of innovations perhaps enabled big businesses to just get bigger and frankly, just to get lazy. So, I think things are about to change, and particularly for small businesses, I think it's an exciting time.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and finally, one other thing, I think there are a lot of technologies and tools out there that businesses could and should be using to improve. While I can't really give a one-size-fits-all piece of advice on what is and isn't best for any business, I'll certainly flag that I think it's important that businesses make sure they're at the very least set up properly to evaluate new technology and its relevance to them. I see so many companies today that aren't set up properly for such evaluation. So, often it's because the value of today's technology just cuts across so many aspects of a business with what I'd call, deep operational, like OT benefits, and not just the typical sort of information IT benefits. So given what can be offered by the tools on the market today, an IT department, an individual division within a company is not always best placed to assess the true value of today's innovation. It really needs to be done right at the top level.
It really is easy to get overwhelmed, as you said, by the pace of change in today's business environment. Moreover, to do this, we need inspirational leaders and mentors like you. And I actually started to keep a list from my guests who come onto this podcast, and I started writing it down. Mm-hmm. You actually answered this answer pretty much. Do you have anyone in mind who would like to name, who inspired you?
Yeah, look, there's one name in particular, and maybe I'll come on to that. Don't necessarily like to throw names out. I can tell you the type of people probably that have inspired me. Look, I think the reality is I've been inspired by a lot of people across my career. I don't want to leave anybody out. I've also been inspired by people that you might not expect. So, for example, I kind of fell into system safety and risk and later almost fell into consulting. So I wasn't as such inspired to do it. I don't think I even ever looked at an entrepreneur or business builder and thought, I really want to be like her or him. I think where I've been inspired is by those around me, particularly those who've largely forged paths of their own in other ways, but showed me that anything is possible. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. At one point in my life, I was hoping to be a professional tennis player. So we've probably all had aspirations of being a professional sportsman, singer, actor, whatever it is. So yeah, for me, it was for tennis. But as a junior, I wasn't a bad tennis player. I trained with a number of people that later went on to forge professional careers, played Wimbledon, US Open and the like. By way of example, I was in the junior ranks with Tim Henman. He was once ranked number 4 in the world. On top of that, I attended school with a footballer called Michael Owen, who was ex-Liverpool, Real Madrid and England footballer. He actually went on to win the Ballon d'Or, which is the world's best footballer. And he won that in 2001. David Beckham was 4th and Zidane was 9th, by the way. So, Michael Owen was a very good footballer. And being surrounded by such people that can't do anything really but give you inspiration. So, people like that showed me what could be achieved. They also gave me, very, very importantly, a first-hand appreciation of what it took. So, as kids, they weren't that different to everyone else. So I think it normalised an expectation of success. And perhaps more importantly, I saw firsthand the dedication and efforts that are required that go hand in hand with that. So I think that had an impact. That was my younger days. I think in my early career days, I took inspiration from my close friends. Most of my very close uni mates went on to be successful in business, in law, in architecture and the like. And seeing them achieve certainly gave me the energy and confidence to try new things myself in new locations. And it was probably at a time as well when I could easily have started to coast in my job. On top of that, look, it would be rude of me not to mention Howard Lister by name. Howard gave me my first opportunities in Australia. And although we founded it together, Bluefield was really his baby rather than mine. It's Howard that taught me how to consult. And my first big break was really down to him. Today, my inspiration comes from my family and from my work colleagues, I'd say. Doing my best for my family is what gets me out of bed in the morning. Giving them a good life and my kids their best shot at life is my main source of motivation and inspiration. And on top of that, building businesses for people, businesses where people can thrive and take their careers to the next level. That's a big carrot for me. Seeing people achieve things in my companies is hugely inspiring and rewarding for me.
Wow, what an amazing answer, Mark. People around me. It's actually you set up a very good people around you. All of them are highly inspirational. You just don't need to get inspired. If you are with them, you automatically get inspired.
Absolutely.
Amazing answer.
Yep. Surround yourself by good people and everything gets easy.
Correct. And when we speaking about leadership and all, there is a linked question. People, all the times I have seen, we get confused between leadership and management. There's a thin line between it. How do you differentiate it?
I don't see that much differentiation, to be honest. I think people like to make a big deal about it. I mean, look, there's certainly a difference between being an inspiring leader versus the administrative style of management. But administration is not management for me either. So, just need to be careful about the definition. But look, if you're asking me about my thoughts on leadership and management and how to be a good leader, my short answer is, ideally employ the best people you can, set some expectations and then get the hell out their way. So obviously that's a tongue-in-cheek answer to a very complex question, but I'm generally of the view that leadership is about setting a direction. It's about giving people clear goals and responsibilities and then really just helping them achieve those goals. So leadership's about presenting a vision that people can believe in and contribute to. It's also about creating a culture that people can feel part of, in my view. And I've often heard the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I like that quote. But at the same time, you need both. A leader's role is to instill both in his or her company and their team. So, I often look at great football managers on the football field, and some are great tacticians, some are great motivators and manage to get 100% effort from all their players every single game. But the very best managers and leaders are great at both. But even after considering those elements, those two specific items, I think how you go about management itself is very complex and it's highly dependent on companies and team circumstances. So leaders and managers, they have to adapt all the time. It's very easy for me to say hire the best and get out of their way, but what if you don't have the best, and what if you can't afford the best? Clearly you might need to be more of a trainer mentor type manager rather than just say the big ideas type manager leader. So I think good leaders and good managers can adjust as the circumstances present themselves. So I also think good leaders are very self-aware, and particularly of their own strengths and weaknesses. We've all got weaknesses, but they don't have to be a problem if you recognize them and address them. So the key for good leadership is to always focus on the outcome and probably drop your ego and use others to do what you're bad at and stick to what you're good at.
Wow. Thanks, Mark. Great answer. Great leaders will be self-aware. That's very, very key point out of your talk. And from a very generic question for me and the listeners here, I would like to ask one specific question in your area of expertise, that is business. I know business is not easy and it's not everyone's. cup of tea. How do you stay motivated and focused as an entrepreneur, especially during the difficult times, and how do you handle it?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question. And if I said I was always focused and motivated, then that would be a complete lie. So the reality is that you can't always be switched on and put 100% into what you do. You do need time out. You need to stagger your efforts to avoid burnout. And ultimately, I think you need to learn to set a pace that isn't going to kill you. So that pace is different for everyone. But if I use another sports comparison, even the most finely tuned Olympic athletes, they go through training blocks that include downtime and low effort. Of course, they're interspersed with the most horrifically intense training activities, but often the recovery time is as important as the activities themselves. So after 20 years of running my own business, I set a pace I'm comfortable with and I stick to it. It's still quite a pace, but I make sure that I'm never overwhelmed and ensure that I don't burn out. So I run, I play football, I have a family to spend time with, I get plenty of meditation time, usually at the weekend in my car during my second job, which is the family chauffeur. But at the same time, I can set a high pace because I enjoy what I do. I love starting with a blank piece of paper. And as I said earlier, creating something from nothing is motivation enough for me. So, an example of that, 18 months ago, I was sitting in a one-person serviced office in Neutral Bay after I left SYSTRA, staring at 4 brick walls. And I was more motivated than I've ever been in my life. The motivation for me didn't come through my conversations with the sole plant that I had next to me in the office, but it was entirely from the excitement of the unknown, the future, the uncertainty as well as to how things were going to go. And what better way to motivate yourself than by putting everything on the line while you're doing something you enjoy? There's plenty of carrot and stick in that. So that's quite easy for me to motivate myself doing what I'm doing. So, 18 months on and I'm involved with a couple of startups. I've got 2 more established businesses. We've got 300 staff and contractors sitting across those businesses, and I enjoy working with them. And today, they're pushing me in different ways to do better. I'm learning to be a mentor and support people better. I think now my role is largely advisory, and as I get older, I find more enjoyment in that, and seeing others develop and grow, it's now very motivating for me. And finally, if I consider the difficult times element of the question and how to motivate during difficult times, I think in leading businesses, and probably any business, there are always going to be difficult times, and you need to be prepared to deal with those. Good stuff isn't going to happen all the time. Bad stuff is going to happen just as often almost. So you need to be resilient as an entrepreneur and a business owner. But I find that maintaining a good sense of perspective also helps. And the reality is that what we do in business, it's not often a matter of life and death. Things aren't always going to go your way. And so long as you still have your health and a roof over your head, so what? I try to make sure I don't get too excited when we win and don't get too down when we lose. It's part and parcel of what businesses do. Of course, you've got to make sure you're taking 3 steps forward and only 2 steps back. It's not the other way around. But to hope for no steps backwards, then you're completely underprepared and you're being unrealistic. So you've got to take some things with a pinch of salt. And for me, I think if it takes you more than 1 sleep to recover from a loss, then you're probably not doing the right thing and probably want to try something else.
Great insights, Mark. Amazing answers. The pace plus burnout. I really like that. Pace plus burnout is very important, and going from 0 to 1 is also what a key lesson you gave me. Excited plus damn. This is very important because in the recent books or stories I heard or read, I've seen some great entrepreneurs who are hugely successful and could not handle failure. As you said, be gratitude in the damn places as damn positions as well. And these entrepreneurs which I just spoke actually ended their lives. So
yeah.
Thanks for sharing those insights.
I think perspective is very important. You can become too focused and your job becomes your life, your business becomes your life. And I think you have to separate the two to some degree, in my view.
Yep. I think you have pretty much answered what I want to ask as my last question in every podcast. But I would still like to ask you to please give some tips to others who want to start their own business or become an entrepreneur like you.
What you mean, tips for the competition? Yeah, I've got some tips. Don't ever start your own business. No, obviously I'm joking. So, being more serious. Look, I think referring to some of the things I said earlier, it's so important to understand your market, your customers and what you're offering. You've got to be sure that what you're offering is in demand. And don't just form your own view either. I think listen to others, make sure your views are informed. Starting a business is hard work, so you don't want to be trying to fight for every scrap because your offering isn't relevant enough to your potential clients. So you've really got to think through what you're doing and really understand your market in the first instance, I think. Secondly, I think one thing I've learned, look, just don't do it alone. I think find yourself some business partners and do it with them. I've always had the view that you need a minimum of 3 to start a business. 1 to champion sales, 1 to champion delivery, and 1 to champion the business operations and the people. So I think when you've got those 3 elements nailed, then growth happens quickly. I think you can still achieve growth and run a business with 2. It will happen slower, and good luck getting past a handful of staff if you go it alone, particularly in consulting. So look for partnerships, and those people will motivate you as well, so you do that. And finally, just be kind and be humble. Treat people well, and I guarantee it will come back to you, particularly again in consulting, where people do business with people that they like and trust.
Yep, great advice, Mark. And thank you very much. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for coming on to this podcast.
No, thank you very much, Raman. I really enjoyed it.
I believe everyone listening to this podcast has got something to take away from today's discussion. If you like this podcast, please listen, follow, and share this podcast within your network. If you believe we should be sharing your story or someone within your network, there is a railway leader who should be here sharing his or her contribution to this industry, contact me on railwaytransportationsystems@gmail.com. Thank you for your time today. See you next fortnight. Until then, stay safe and take care of yourself.